My name is Emily Mishaw, and I'm 34 years old. I never thought I'd be sitting in a lawyer's office, trembling as I realized the man I married had orchestrated the greatest betrayal of my life. James, the charming financial advisor who swept me off my feet, had spent months pressuring me to sign away my family's $1 million estate and mansion. If not for one brilliant attorney who saw through his scheme, I would have lost everything. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to hear how justice finally prevailed. I grew up in Beacon Hill, one of Boston's most prestigious neighborhoods. My grandfather built a real estate empire from nothing, acquiring historic properties throughout New England over 50 years. He always told me, "Emily, these buildings aren't just investments, they're our family's legacy." When he passed away 6 years ago, I inherited the bulk of his estate at age 28, 5 commercial properties in downtown Boston, 3 apartment buildings, and our family's crown jewel, a 7-bedroom historic mansion on 3 acres overlooking the Massachusetts coastline, valued at over $12 million. Initially, I was overwhelmed by the responsibility. I'd graduated with a business degree from Boston University and worked in property management for several years, but suddenly managing assets worth over $30 million was daunting. Still, I was determined to honor my grandfather's legacy. I hired a small team, took courses in real estate investment, and within 2 years, I'd increased our portfolio value by 15%. I was focused entirely on business until that fateful charity gala in spring 2023. The event benefited children's education, and I donated significantly enough to earn a spot at the main table. That's where I met James Williams. He was tall with dark hair and striking blue eyes, impeccably dressed in a custom suit. When he introduced himself as a financial advisor specializing in high-net-worth clients, I was immediately impressed by his knowledge and confidence. That property on Newbury Street, he commented during dinner, brilliant acquisition. The area's commercial value is projected to increase 30% in 5 years. I was taken aback. "How did you know about that purchase?" "It just closed last month," he smiled warmly. "I make it my business to follow smart investors. Your grandfather built something remarkable, but you're taking it to another level. What woman wouldn't be flattered?" Unlike most men who seemed intimidated by my wealth or saw me as a trophy, James appeared genuinely interested in my business acumen. Our conversation flowed effortlessly from real estate trends to our shared love of historical architecture and sailing. After the gala, our courtship was a whirlwind. James took me to exclusive restaurants, surprised me with thoughtful gifts reflecting our conversations, and always showed genuine interest in my business decisions. He never seemed threatened when I talked about finances. In fact, he offered insightful suggestions that actually improved some of my property investment. My best friend Rachel was skeptical from the start. 8 months isn't enough time to really know someone, she warned over coffee one morning. Especially someone who's going to have access to your entire life's wealth. "He's not after my money," I insisted. "He has his own successful practice. Besides, I'm keeping my assets separate, we're getting a prenup." Rachel's concerns seemed unfounded. James never objected to the prenuptial agreement, even suggesting clauses to further protect my inherited properties. His willingness to safeguard my interests only made me trust him more. Our wedding was everything I'd dreamed of, a beautiful ceremony at my family's estate with 200 guests, followed by a 3-week honeymoon sailing through the Greek islands. When we returned, James moved into my mansion, and I truly believe we'd build a wonderful life together. He'd talk about our future children running through the halls of my family home, how we'd preserve the estate for generations to come. Those first few months of marriage felt like a perfect partnership. James would bring me coffee in my home office as I reviewed property reports. We'd discuss business strategies over dinner, and he'd offer intelligent advice when I faced challenging decisions. I'd never felt so supported, so understood. Each night, falling asleep in our master suite overlooking the Atlantic, I felt grateful to have found someone who valued both me and my family's legacy. I had no idea that behind his loving gaze, James was already calculating exactly how he would take everything from me. Looking back, I should have recognized the shift that occurred exactly 6 months after our wedding. It began subtly during a routine discussion about one of my commercial properties needing renovation. $30,000 for new electrical wiring seems excessive, James remarked, frowning at the estimate I'd received. "You know, you're brilliant with acquisitions, but contractors see you coming from a mile away. It was the first time he'd criticized my business judgment, delivered with just enough concern to mask the condescension. Before I could defend myself, he continued, "Have you considered how much we could save on taxes if we consolidated our accounts? A financial firm has strategies that could save us thousands." That evening, I agreed to merge our banking accounts, for tax purposes, despite my initial plan to keep finances separate. The prenup protected my properties, I reasoned, so shared banking seemed harmless. The next red flag appeared when James suggested replacing Morgan, my property manager of 4 years, with his college friend Nathan. Morgan missed those code violations on the Marlborough Street property, James pointed out during dinner one night. Nathan specializes in historic buildings. He'd catch those issues before they become problems. I hesitated. Morgan's been loyal and effective. Those violations were minor. Minor until the city fines you $20,000, James interrupted. Nathan's already agreed to take over. I thought you'd appreciate me handling it so you could focus on bigger picture. I felt a flash of irritation that he'd approached Nathan without consulting me, but James kissed my forehead and added, "I'm just looking out for you, sweetheart. Your grandfather would want me to help protect what he built." Invoking my grandfather was manipulative, but effective. Within a week, Nathan replaced Morgan, and I noticed how James had orchestrated the transition without actually giving me space to object. Around this time, my friendship with Rachel began to suffer. James never explicitly told me not to see her, but he'd make comments after our lunch dates. "Rachel seems jealous of our happiness," or "I notice you always doubt yourself after spending time with her." I started declining Rachel's invitations, telling myself I was just busy with work. In reality, I was avoiding the discomfort of navigating between her concerns and my husband's subtle disapproval. Our first major argument erupted when I questioned unusual transactions in our joint account, several transfers of $9,500 to an LLC I didn't recognize. "That's the consulting group helping restructure our investment portfolio," James explained impatiently. "But I never approved hiring consultants," I countered. James's expression darkened. "Emily, we discussed this last month. Don't you remember agreeing to it?" His voice softened with concern. "You've been so stressed lately." "This is exactly why I'm trying to simplify things for us." I had no recollection of this discussion, but James described it in such detail that I began doubting my memory. Had stress affected me more than I realized? That night, I apologized to him for overreacting. James's mysterious absences became more frequent, business dinners that ran late, weekend conferences I wasn't invited to attend. When I called during these times, he often didn't answer, later explaining he'd been in meetings where phones weren't allowed. One afternoon, I came home early from inspecting a property and found James in my home office, hastily closing a drawer containing my personal documents. He claimed he was looking for insurance papers, but his startled expression suggested otherwise. That evening, I checked the drawer and noticed my property deeds had been reorganized. Nothing was missing, but someone had clearly been studying them. When I mentioned this casually over dinner, James suggested I was becoming paranoid. "Running an empire is stressful," he said sympathetically. "Maybe you should consider therapy." My client's wife found it helpful when she struggled with anxiety. His words stung, not just the implication that I was mentally unstable, but the subtle comparison to my client's wife, as though my primary identity should be as his spouse, not as the businesswoman I'd been long before meeting him. Still, I pushed these concerns aside. James was successful, attentive, and seemed genuinely invested in our future. If he sometimes made decisions without consulting me, wasn't that what partners did, lighten each other's loads? If he questioned my business judgment occasionally, wasn't that healthier than blind agreement? I didn't realize then that these seemingly minor incursions were laying groundwork for something far more sinister, that my husband was systematically undermining my confidence, isolating me from friends, and positioning himself to control not just our marriage, but my entire inheritance. By our first anniversary, James's subtle criticisms had evolved into open control of our finances. He no longer suggested, he directed. What began as helpful advice transformed into constant supervision of every business decision I made. "We need to talk about this commercial development opportunity," James announced one evening, spreading papers across our dining table. "A client gave me inside information they're breaking ground next month on a massive project in Seaport District. If we liquidate your Cambridge apartments, we could be first investors. Those apartments generate consistent revenue," I protested. "My grandfather always said, Your grandfather didn't face today's market realities, James interrupted. This opportunity requires immediate capital. Trust me, I do this for a living. When I hesitated, his demeanor changed instantly. His voice lowered as he moved closer. You're not thinking clearly, Emily. Is this about control? Because lately, you seem determined to undermine every suggestion I make. That's not fair, I said, feeling my confidence waver. I just need time to review the projections. We don't have time, he snapped, then immediately softened. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to raise my voice. I'm just trying to help us build something bigger than what your grandfather left. Don't you trust me? That manipulation, the quick pivot from aggression to wounded concern became his standard approach. He'd push until I showed resistance, then make me feel selfish for questioning his intentions. As weeks passed, my anxiety intensified. I began double-checking decisions I previously would have made confidently. Sleep became elusive. I'd lie awake analyzing conversations, wondering if I was being unreasonable or if something was genuinely wrong. One morning, while James was showering, I discovered unfamiliar documents in his briefcase listing all my properties with valuation notes in his handwriting. When confronted, his explanation seemed plausible. I'm creating contingency plans for property tax appeals, he said smoothly. The assessments on your historic properties are inflated. I thought you'd be pleased I was looking out for our interests. Our interests. Not my inheritance, not my family legacy, our interests. The subtle shift in language wasn't lost on me, but his explanation was just convincing enough to quiet my suspicions. Soon after, James began reporting a series of financial emergencies requiring immediate action. The boiler in one apartment building supposedly failed, needing $50,000 in repairs. A commercial tenant allegedly threatened legal action over structural issues. Each crisis required quick decisions and substantial funds, with James conveniently positioned to handle everything. I've transferred money from our joint account to cover the contractor deposit, he'd informed me after the fact. The situation couldn't wait for your approval. My physical health began deteriorating alongside my mental well-being. I lost 15 pounds in 2 months. Dark circles permanently shadowed my eye. When my doctor expressed concern about elevated blood pressure and weight loss, James accompanied me to the appointment. She's been under tremendous stress managing her properties, he told the doctor while squeezing my hand sympathetically. I keep telling her to delegate more responsibility. The doctor nodded in agreement, prescribing anti-anxiety medication rather than recognizing the real source of my distress. James's most elaborate deception came in the form of fabricated market reports showing significant downturns in commercial real estate. The market's collapsing, he declared grimly, showing me graphs and projections. We need to restructure immediately to protect your assets. These reports, I later discovered, were entirely falsified, created by Nathan using actual financial publication templates but with manipulated data. Social gatherings became exercises in humiliation. James would interrupt my conversations to clarify business matters I was discussing, making me appear incompetent in front of others. He'd share anecdotes about my cute misunderstandings of financial concepts, laughing indulgently as though I were a child rather than a successful businesswoman. At a dinner party with my longtime family friend and attorney Edward Barnes, I mentioned concerns about one property's management. James immediately interjected, "Darling, you're confusing that building with the Beacon Street property. Remember what happened last time you mixed those up? No such confusion had ever occurred." When I tried to correct him, James gave Edward a meaningful look and changed the subject. Later, Edward pulled me aside. "Emily, is everything okay? You seem different lately." Before I could respond, James appeared at my side. "She's just tired from juggling too many responsibilities. I've been telling her to step back a bit, haven't I, sweetheart?" Edward's concern was evident, but James steered me away before the conversation could continue. On the drive home, James was furious. "Edward's always had a thing for you, hasn't he? Is that why you were whispering together?" "He was concerned about me," I defended. "He should be concerned about his own business instead of interfering in our marriage," James snapped. By creating constant crises, undermining my competence, and isolating me from friends, James had systematically dismantled my confidence and independence. I was losing weight, losing sleep, and worst of all, losing my ability to trust my own judgment. The stage was perfectly set for his final act, coercing me to sign away everything I owned. The culmination of James's manipulation arrived exactly 14 months into our marriage, disguised as a solution to problems he had largely manufactured. It was a Tuesday morning when he entered my home office with a leather portfolio containing legal documents, his expression a practiced mix of concern and determination. "Emily, we need to sign these today," he said, spreading papers across my desk. "They're for asset protection, restructuring your properties into a new trust structure." I glanced at the substantial stack of legal documents, immediately uncomfortable with the complexity and volume. "I'll need time to review these properly, maybe have Edward look them over." James's jaw tightened. "There's no time. The filing deadline for the quarter is tomorrow, and our lawyer has another appointment this afternoon. This is the protective restructuring we've discussed for months." We hadn't discussed any restructuring in detail, only vague mentions James had made about protecting assets without specifics. The sudden urgency felt manufactured. "What exactly am I signing?" I asked, flipping through the dense legal text. "It's complicated legal language, but essentially we're moving your properties into a more tax-advantageous structure," James explained impatiently. "I've been working with Williams & Associates for weeks on this." Williams & Associates was a law firm I'd never heard of until James started mentioning them casually a few months prior, as though they'd always been handling my legal matter. As I began reading more carefully, I noticed alarming phrases: transfer of ownership, relinquishment of control, and irrevocable trust appointments. The documents appeared to be transferring my properties into a complex structure where I would no longer be the primary controlling trustee. "James, this looks like I'm signing away ownership rights," I said, my heart racing. His expression darkened. "You're misinterpreting legal terminology. This protects our assets from potential lawsuits and reduces our tax burden substantially." He moved behind me, hands on my shoulders, voice lowering. "Emily, do you think I would do anything to harm what we're building together? After everything I've done to help secure your grandfather's legacy?" When I still hesitated, his demeanor shifted dramatically. He slammed his hand on the desk, causing me to jump. "Enough, your paranoia is getting out of control. Do you know how many hours I've spent creating this protection for us? For you." His voice rose with each word. "What exactly do you think I'm doing here? Stealing from you? Is that what you think of your husband?" Tears formed in my eyes, both from fear and confusion. This wasn't the first time James had become intimidating when I questioned him, but the intensity was escalating. "I just want to understand what I'm signing," I whispered. "Fine. Don't sign it. Watch your properties get decimated by the market crash I've been warning you about." "Is that what you want?" He paced the room, physically imposing as he towered over me. "Is that how you honor your grandfather's memory? By letting his legacy crumble because you're too stubborn to listen to financial expertise?" Exhausted from months of similar arguments and sleepless nights, I signed the preliminary documents, transfer authorizations and intent declarations with shaking hands, telling myself I could revoke them if necessary after consulting Edward. That evening, still unsettled by the morning's events, I used James's laptop when mine wouldn't connect to our home network. As I opened the browser to check my email, I discovered he hadn't logged out of his own account. A message preview caught my eye. Emily's portfolio liquidation timeline. Heart pounding, I clicked on the email thread between James and someone named Victor at Offshore Solutions LLC. The messages detailed plans for asset redistribution following the trust transfer and mention routing funds through the Cayman structure to avoid detection. Scrolling through his email further, I discovered correspondence with a woman named Diane, containing both financial discussions and intimately worded messages. One email included a photo of them together on a yacht I didn't recognize, his arm around her waist. The pieces finally aligned with devastating clarity. James wasn't protecting our future, he was systematically preparing to steal my entire inheritance while simultaneously carrying on an affair. When I heard his key in the door, I quickly closed the laptop and retreated to our bedroom, mind racing with this horrifying revelation. For the first time, I was truly afraid of what James might do if confronted directly. I needed time to think, to plan an escape. That night, James informed me we had an appointment with our attorney the following morning to finalize the documents I'd preliminarily authorized. When I suggested postponing, claiming illness, his response chilled me. "This isn't optional, Emily," he said quietly. "Everything's been arranged. The transfers are already in motion based on your signatures this morning. Tomorrow just finalizes the process." "And if I refuse?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. His expression hardened. "I wouldn't recommend that. Remember, these restructuring documents include provisions about mental competency. Your recent episodes of paranoia, your anxiety medication, your documented history of confusion about business matters. It wouldn't be difficult to make a case for temporary financial guardianship if necessary. The threat was unmistakable. He had methodically built a false narrative of my mental instability that could potentially be used against me. The next morning, I found myself in the gleaming offices of Williams & Associates, seated across from a silver-haired attorney named Richard who barely made eye contact with me. James sat beside me, his hand resting possessively on my arm, a gesture that appeared supportive but functioned as a warning. As Richard pushed the final trust documents across the polished table, I experienced a moment of complete emotional collapse. Tears streamed down my face as I realized the magnitude of betrayal orchestrated by the man I had loved and trusted. Everything my grandfather had built, everything he had entrusted to me, was about to be signed away. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Williams?" Richard asked, not with concern but impatience. James tightened his grip on my arm. "My wife is just emotional about finalizing her grandfather's legacy protection," he explained smoothly. "Aren't you, darling?" In that moment, staring at the pen being offered to me, I had never felt more trapped or alone. James had orchestrated my isolation so completely that I had nowhere to turn, no one to call for help. I truly believed I had no choice but to sign. What I didn't know was that fate was about to intervene in the form of Alexandra Winters, who would walk into my life the very next day and change everything. The morning after the devastating signing session, I fled the house while James was on a business call. I couldn't bear being in his presence, watching him celebrate his victory while pretending to console me. I drove aimlessly until I found myself at a small coffee shop in Cambridge, far from our usual haunt. Sitting in the corner booth, I stared blankly at my untouched latte, overwhelmed by the reality of what had happened. My entire inheritance, properties worth millions, the family mansion, everything my grandfather had built was now controlled by an elaborate trust structure that effectively gave James complete power. I didn't realize I was crying until a tissue appeared before me, offered by a woman with sharp eyes and a concerned expression. "I'm sorry to intrude," she said, "but you look like you're having one of the worst days of your life." Something about her direct approach broke through my isolation. Before I could stop myself, a sob escaped. The woman sat across from me, waiting patiently as I struggled to compose myself. "I've just lost everything," I finally whispered. "I'm Alexandra Winters," she said, placing a business card on the table. "Estate attorney. Whatever you've lost, it might not be as permanent as you think." I stared at the card, embossed with credentials from Harvard Law and a prestigious Boston firm specializing in estate litigation. Under normal circumstances, I would never have shared personal details with a stranger, but desperation stripped away my usual caution. "My husband," I began, then faltered, embarrassed by my naivety. "Let me guess," Alexandra said gently. "Financial advisor, charming, moved quickly into marriage. Recently had you signed documents you didn't fully understand." My shock must have been evident because she nodded grimly. "Unfortunately, I've seen this pattern before," she explained. "Predatory individuals targeting wealthy individuals, especially those who have inherited significant assets." Initial relief at being understood quickly gave way to shame. I should have known better. I have a business degree. I successfully managed these properties for years before him. "Financial abuse doesn't discriminate based on education or intelligence," Alexandra replied firmly. "It's about systematic manipulation and control. Would you consider letting me review what you've signed?" My instinct was to refuse. James had convinced me that sharing our financial restructuring with outsiders would trigger audits and legal complications. But James had already won. What more could I lose? The next day, I met Alexandra at her office, bringing copies of documents I'd secretly photographed with my phone. As she reviewed them, her expression grew increasingly troubled. "Emily, these aren't asset protection documents. This is an asset stripping scheme," she explained, pointing to key provisions. "This clause transfers controlling interest in all properties to the Windermere Trust, where you're only a minority beneficiary. And this section," she indicated another paragraph, "gives your husband, as trustee, unilateral power to liquidate assets without secondary approval." "Can it be reversed?" I asked, hope flickering faintly. "These signatures were obtained through misrepresentation and coercion," Alexandra said thoughtfully. "Absolutely grounds for invalidation. But we'll need evidence of the deception." Over the next week, meeting secretly while James believed I was at therapy appointments he'd insisted upon, Alexandra educated me about financial abuse and coercive control, terms I'd never applied to my situation. Coercive control is about creating an environment where the victim feels they have no choice but to comply, she explained. The isolation from friends, the manufactured financial crises, the undermining of your confidence, the subtle threats, these are textbook tactics. With Alexandra's guidance, I began gathering evidence. Photographs of documents James had falsified, recordings of his threatening statements, Massachusetts being a one-party consent state for recordings, bank statements showing unauthorized transfers, and the damning emails I'd discovered. Meanwhile, Alexandra's investigative team uncovered shocking information about James's background. His financial advisory credentials were legitimate, but he had a pattern of romantic relationships with wealthy women who subsequently experienced financial losses. 2 previous girlfriends had filed complaints that were settled confidentially. Most disturbingly, James Williams wasn't even his original name. He was born James Wellington. Changing his name after a series of investment schemes in Chicago led to civil penalty. He's refined his approach with each target, Alexandra explained. Learning from previous mistakes. With you, he created a more comprehensive strategy: the longer con of marriage, the patience to establish trust over months, the gradual isolation and psychological manipulation. The offshore accounts Alexandra's team discovered revealed where James had been transferring funds. Significant sums from our joint accounts had been moved to Cayman Islands, holdings beyond my reach. As evidence mounted, my emotional strength slowly returned. Alexandra wasn't just my attorney, she became my lifeline, the first person in months who validated my experiences rather than questioning my perception. What you're feeling is normal, she assured me when anxiety overwhelmed me. Trauma bonding makes it difficult to reconcile the person you thought you married with the predator he's revealed himself to be. After 3 weeks of intensive preparation, Alexandra felt we had sufficient evidence for emergency legal action. We'll file for emergency injunctions freezing all assets and transactions, she explained. Then seek court orders invalidating the trust transfers based on fraudulent inducement and duress. The night before our court filing, I sat in Alexandra's office reviewing our strategy, finally feeling a glimmer of hope that I might reclaim what was stolen from me, not just my inheritance, but my autonomy and self-trust. You should prepare yourself, Alexandra warned. Once James is served with these papers, he'll likely become desperate. Desperation makes people dangerous. I nodded, finally ready to fight back. I've been afraid of him for too long. It's time to be afraid of me. Alexandra's warning about James's reaction proved prophetic. When he was served with our emergency injunction papers the following morning, his response was immediate and volatile. I had moved to a hotel the previous night, a security precaution Alexandra insisted upon. James discovered my absence simultaneously with receiving the legal documents. Within minutes, my phone exploded with messages and calls. You have no idea what you've done, his first voicemail hissed, his charming facade completely abandoned. This will not end well for you. The messages escalated from threats to desperate bargaining to false remorse, a roller coaster of manipulation tactics. I forwarded each message to Alexandra without responding, each one strengthening our case for coercion and emotional abuse. When legal threats failed to intimidate me, James attempted to access our home security system remotely to disable the cameras, not realizing I had already changed all codes and passwords under Alexandra's guidance. His digital footprints attempting unauthorized access created additional evidence of his intention. Our first court appearance for the emergency injunction was scheduled just 2 days after filing. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Alina Harrington, listened carefully as Alexandra presented our initial evidence: the misleading trust documents, financial records showing unauthorized transfers, and recordings of James's threats. Your Honor, these documents were signed under duress and false pretenses, Alexandra argued. Mr. Williams deliberately misrepresented their purpose and effect, exploiting his position of trust within the marriage. James's hastily retained attorney, a sharp-suited man named Victor Chambers, attempted to portray me as unstable and financially irresponsible. Mrs. Williams has been under psychiatric care for anxiety and paranoia, Chambers claimed. These allegations are manifestations of her unfortunately deteriorating mental state. Alexandra was prepared for this attack. Your Honor, we've submitted Mr. Williams's emails detailing his deliberate strategy to create the appearance of mental instability. Additionally, Mrs. Mitchell's physician has provided a statement confirming that her anxiety symptoms began only after Mr. Williams's controlling behaviors escalated. Judge Harrington granted our emergency freeze on all assets pending full investigation, the first victory in what would become a complicated legal battle. While the asset freeze prevented James from transferring or selling properties, recovering what he'd already moved offshore presented a greater challenge. Alexandra connected me with Rachel again, who immediately rushed to my hotel room with tearful apologies for not being more persistent when she sensed something was wrong. I knew something was off, Rachel admitted, hugging me tightly, but he was so convincing when he said you needed space. Rachel introduced me to her brother-in-law, a forensic accountant who specialized in asset recovery. His expertise proved invaluable as we worked to trace the complex web of transfers James had created. As our case built momentum, we discovered the depths of James's deception. Nathan, the property manager James had installed, had been systematically falsifying maintenance records and expenses, creating paper trails of problems that didn't exist while skimming actual revenue. Most shocking was the revelation about Richard, the attorney from Williams & Associates who had presided over my signing session. He wasn't a legitimate independent attorney but James's college roommate with a suspended law license, operating under a false identity. This crosses from civil fraud into criminal territory, Alexandra explained during our strategy session. The impersonation of a licensed attorney, falsification of legal documents, wire fraud for the offshore transfers, these are matters for the district attorney. James, realizing the mounting evidence against him, attempted one final desperate maneuver, filing an emergency petition claiming I was mentally incompetent and seeking temporary guardianship over my affairs. It's actually good news, Alexandra said when I received the petition. He's getting sloppy, overreaching. This gives us opportunity to address all his false claims in one comprehensive hearing. The competency hearing became the centerpiece of our case. James arrived in court with a psychiatrist he'd paid to evaluate me without ever meeting me, based solely on cherry-picked text messages and edited recordings of our arguments. Alexandra had prepared me extensively for cross-examination. When James's attorney questioned me about my episodes of confusion and irrational behavior, I remained calm and articulate, explaining how each incident had been manufactured or exaggerated by James. Mrs. Williams, Chambers began during cross-examination, deliberately using my married name despite my request to be addressed as Michelle. Can you explain why you required psychiatric medication if, as you claim, there was nothing wrong with your mental state? I experienced situational anxiety as a direct result of ongoing gaslighting and emotional abuse, I replied steadily. As Dr. Levine's independent evaluation confirms, my symptoms were consistent with a person experiencing coercive control, not with any underlying psychiatric condition. The turning point came when Alexandra called her surprise witness, Diane Reynolds, the woman from James's emails. Initially reluctant to testify, Diane had eventually agreed after Alexandra showed her evidence that James had similarly attempted to manipulate her finances. James told me he was separated from his wife, Diane testified, avoiding James's glare from the defendant's table. He claimed his wife was mentally unstable and that he was protecting her family assets from her self-destructive behavior. He proposed marriage and suggested I invest in joint ventures with him. As Diane's testimony continued, James's face contorted with rage. In a momentary loss of control, he stood up and shouted, "You're lying," before his attorney could restrain him. The outburst only reinforced the image of volatility that Alexandra had been constructing. Judge Harrington's interim ruling was decisive. The competency petition was denied, all asset transfers were frozen pending final determination, and James was barred from contacting me or accessing any properties in the disputed estate. Following this victory, Alexandra and I worked with federal authorities who had become interested in the offshore components of James's scheme. Their investigation revealed that James had attempted to wire transfer over $12 million the day after our injunction was filed, a desperate move to get funds out of the country before they were frozen. The transfer had been flagged and stopped by banking compliance officers. The final blow to James's defense came when federal agents apprehended him at Boston Logan Airport with a one-way ticket to a non-extradition country, traveling under a passport with a different name. His flight attempt was the last piece of evidence needed to completely dismantle any remaining credibility. During this tumultuous legal battle, I found my voice and strength returning. With each court appearance, each piece of evidence we presented, each small victory chipped away at the control James had established over my life. The woman who had trembled signing papers under duress was transforming into someone who could confidently testify about complex financial matters and withstand aggressive cross-examination. As Alexandra prepared for our final hearing, she reminded me of how far we'd come. When we met, you believed you had lost everything, she said. Now you're not just fighting to regain your inheritance, you're helping build a case that might protect other women from experiencing what you went through. Standing in the courtroom for our final arguments, watching James in his now rumpled designer suit, his confident facade replaced by desperate anger, I realized I was no longer afraid of him. The power he had held over me through manipulation and fear had evaporated in the bright light of truth and justice. Judge Harrington's final ruling came down like a thunderclap on a clear day, decisive, powerful, and completely in our favor. The courtroom fell silent as she delivered her judgment in clear, measured tones that left no room for ambiguity. This court finds clear and convincing evidence that James Williams engaged in a systematic pattern of fraud, coercion, and misrepresentation to gain control of Emily Mitchell's assets, she stated. All documents signed under these conditions are hereby declared null and void. The judge ordered immediate restoration of all properties to my sole ownership, required full financial accounting of all transferred assets, and granted a permanent restraining order against James. Most satisfyingly, she referred the case to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution on multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation. As James was led away to meet with his criminal defense attorney, the gravity of his situation finally seemed to register on his face. The confident financial advisor who had systematically plotted to steal my inheritance now faced potential prison time and complete professional ruin. The following weeks brought a flurry of activity as we worked to unwind the complex web James had created. Properties were legally returned to my sole control, though recovering the offshore funds proved more challenging. Eventually, through international legal cooperation, we recovered approximately 80% of what James had transferred abroad. The criminal case against James moved forward steadily. Faced with overwhelming evidence, he accepted a plea deal resulting in a 7-year prison sentence, restitution orders, and permanent revocation of his financial licenses. The man who had tried to steal my inheritance would now have a convicted felon's record following him for life. Nathan and Richard faced lesser charges but significant professional consequences. Richard's impersonation of a licensed attorney resulted in additional criminal charges, while Nathan lost his property management credentials and faced civil penalties for his role in the scheme. With the legal battles largely resolved, I faced a different challenge: emotional recovery. Despite the validation of the court ruling, I struggled with residual trauma from the experience. How could I have been so thoroughly deceived? How could I trust my judgment again? Healing isn't linear, my therapist, a genuine one I chose myself, reminded me during our sessions. You're mourning both the relationship you thought you had and the sense of security that was taken from you. Rebuilding relationships proved both challenging and healing. Rachel and I reconnected fully, our friendship stronger after weathering James's attempts to separate us. I should have tried harder to reach you, she said during a tearful lunch reunion. He was a master manipulator, I reminded her. And I wasn't ready to hear the truth then. Over dinner with Edward Barnes, my family's longtime attorney whom James had worked so hard to keep away from me, I apologized for doubting his concerns. You have nothing to apologize for, Edward insisted. These predators are sophisticated. I've seen it happen to smart, capable people before. What matters is you fought back and won. Alexandra became more than my attorney, she became a close friend and mentor. Her expertise had not only saved my inheritance but had shown me how legal knowledge could be a powerful tool for protection and justice. 6 months after the court ruling, inspired by Alexandra's work, I established the Mitchell Foundation for Financial Literacy and Protection, using a portion of my recovered assets to help others recognize and escape financial abuse. We created educational programs about coercive control and financial manipulation, particularly targeting women with significant assets or inheritance. Financial abuse thrives in silence and isolation, I explained during our foundation's launch event. By sharing our stories and education, we remove the predator's most powerful weapons: shame and secrecy. Alexandra joined the foundation's board, bringing her legal expertise to develop guidelines for estate attorneys to recognize warning signs of potential exploitation. Together, we lobbied for stronger legal protections against coercive control in financial relationships. The process of reclaiming my properties became part of my healing journey. I walked through each building, reconnecting with the history and legacy they represented. The mansion, which had become a prison of manipulation during my marriage to James, was gradually transformed back into a home that reflected my family's heritage and my own identity. The red flags I had missed now seemed painfully obvious. James's whirlwind courtship had been designed to prevent proper due diligence. His excessive charm and perfect mirroring of my interests had been calculated to create fast emotional attachment. His willingness to sign a prenuptial agreement had distracted from his true plan to circumvent it entirely through coercion and fraud. I learned to trust my instincts again, to recognize that uncomfortable feeling when something doesn't add up as wisdom rather than paranoia. The experience left me more cautious but not closed off. I developed healthier boundaries while remaining open to genuine connection. Most importantly, I reclaimed the confidence in my business acumen that James had systematically undermined. Under my renewed leadership, the property portfolio not only recovered but expanded thoughtfully, honoring my grandfather's legacy while establishing my own vision. The journey from victim to survivor to advocate wasn't easy, but each step strengthened my resolve to use my experience to help others. The woman who sat crying in that coffee shop, believing she had lost everything, had discovered a resilience and purpose stronger than any attempt to break her. Today, as I stand in the study of my family home truly mine again looking out at the Massachusetts coastline, I feel grateful for the second chance I receive. My grandfather always said our properties weren't just investments but legacies, and now I understand that legacy includes not just what we build, but how fiercely we protect it. Have you ever trusted someone who betrayed that trust? How did you recover and rebuild? Share your experiences in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to my channel for more stories of resilience and healing. Remember that no matter how clever the deception, truth and justice can still prevail. Thank you for listening to my journey.